Finger guns like crazy. Tuesday's midterms elections are over. Well, at least they're almost over. What happened to the red tsunami that people like Jim suspected was going to happen? I don't know. We'll talk about that. We're going to be covering the good, the bad, and the ugly of the election. Also, what do the results mean for Trump? And lastly, what do the elections mean policy-wise for the country? We're going to be talking about this and more on episode 371 of the In the Tank podcast. Alrighty, folks, welcome to the In the Tank podcast. As always, I am your host, Donald Kendal, and joining me today, I've got Jim Likely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing just great. And when I asked Donnie for finger guns to start the podcast, I get finger guns. It was fantastic. That's your best finger guns ever. They're so fast.
Sorry, the quickest finger guns in the West.
That's right.
Also joining us, Justin Haskins, editorial director at the Heartland Institute and co-author of the latest Glenn Beck book, The Great Reset, Joe Biden and the Rise of 21st Century Fascism. Justin Haskins, what's going on, sir?
Not too much. I'm doing all right. You guys were making fun of my my beard earlier when I came on the show, so now I need to go see my therapist when the show is over. But other than that, I'm doing okay. It's going all right.
Yeah, Justin just went on a bender since Tuesday night. Apparently, he's just woken up from the stupor to join our podcast.
It's funny. I was gonna make a joke last week earlier this week. I think on Monday. I had a plan to make a joke with you on one of our phone calls that I was growing out my beard because I knew you'd be seeing this, and that I was not going to shave it until Republicans won. Until they took over everything. And I'm really glad that I didn't make that promise to anybody because I thought that would be really funny. And now, I don't know, I might be growing this beard out for years.
Oh, well, we've got a lot to talk about this episode. But before we do, I do have to put out that alert to our audio-only listeners. That is 99.9% of our audience here. That if you want to join in the conversation, you could watch our live stream a day earlier on Thursdays at noon, streaming on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Rumble. And you can join the conversation, put your comments and questions. Maybe we'll show your comments on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. So I just want to put that word out there. And also, if you want to support our channel, you could do it just by doing a couple of easy things. One is hitting that like button. One is sharing this content, hitting that subscribe button if you haven't already, or leaving a comment under the video. Any of those things will help break through those big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. But like I said, we got some love the beard comments. Those must be your fake accounts. So we have a lot to talk about. But let's start off with a little video here. So last week, I asked the panel, composed of Jim, Chris, and Cameron, what they thought was going to happen in the midterms. So here is a bit of their responses. Go ahead and play that video.
Oh, I think it's going to be a red tsunami. I think 63 seats in the House is a very ambitious number. I don't think we're going to see that. But Nancy Pelosi's days of running Washington are over very soon.
I totally agree with Jim. And the past couple election cycles, the polls have been so wildly off. I don't trust the polls anymore. In a lot of races that you would think would just be slam dunks for the Democrats, like the gubernatorial race in New York, Lee Zeldin is within striking distance of Kathy Hochul. There are a bunch of Senate seats that most people thought were going to be guaranteed to go to the Democrats that are competitive, especially in Washington State, in Nevada, Arizona, Blake Masters. So there are a lot of races that I think Democrats thought that they were going to have in the bag that the GOP is actually going to be pretty competitive in. I don't think this is going to be a red tsunami, But I do think that the GOP is going to pick up House pretty well, and I think that the Senate's going to be really, really tight.
My son's trying to chime in and say that he thinks it's going to be a red wave too. Yep, so everyone was wrong, including my son. So no red wave, bit of a red trickle, I think is the term that's trying to be coined by some. But I mean, it was still a win for the Republicans. As of the time of the recording of this episode, it looks very likely the Republicans are going to take the House, which means the end of Nancy Pelosi being the Speaker of the House, which I think we can all celebrate. And there is still a slim, an outside chance that Republicans can take the Senate. So Jim, as the only featured person in that flashback, giving just horrible predictions, I'll give you first whack at this. What happened in your estimation?
Well, I mean, not horrible predictions. They were bad. Let's just call them bad. We'll put so the title of this podcast is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Okay, I'll put that in the bad. There's no doubt about that. But, if we did this podcast yesterday, as you know, Donnie, you were in the office yesterday, my attitude would have been a lot gloomier than it is right now. It's being able to sleep on it for another 24 hours. I think it puts it a little bit more in perspective. I mean, the Democrats, they had a much better night than expected, but they still lost seats. The majority they had in the House of Representatives was narrow to begin with, and so it was probably always going to go. And so it is. I mean, the Republicans will run the House, and the Senate is either going to be the status quo, which is 50-50 with the tiebreak by Vice President Kamala Harris, or more likely than it is for Democrats to pick up a seat and say there's 51 blue seats in the Senate. It's more likely that there would be 51 or even 52 Republicans in the Senate. So that's still outstanding. I mean, it looks like Nevada is going to go to the Republicans. It looks like Arizona is going to be very tight. And, we'll talk about how long it takes to count these votes, which is ridiculous in this country. But it looks like that's a real toss-up. And there's a chance that Blake Masters does come through and win that Senate seat. And if that happens, Washington really is changed in a lot of ways. Now, even just coming in, like as I mentioned, the Republicans only needed 5 seats. They needed to swing 5 seats to take over the House and then hold everything else. Ron DeSantis now that's where the tsunami came in. Or you could say it was a pre-hurricane before the real hurricane that hit Florida just last night. 4 House seats flipped just in the state of Florida. That's how big his momentum was. Carried all these other people over. He won by 20 points, almost, or just about. I mean, that's amazing. He won by what? I think 30,000 votes. It was so narrow. Florida was almost governed by a drug addicted weirdo from the Democrats, Andrew Gillum. But it didn't work out that way. Instead, DeSantis, and now he's, obviously the most powerful and popular governor in the entire country. So funny how things can change really fast. And as somebody mentioned in the comments, Biden said at his press conference yesterday that he's going to do nothing differently for the second half of his presidency. And that's even more reason for a new Republican majority in the House to stop everything and to do nothing. The only real concern I have now, again, sleeping on it for another 24 hours, is that that the Republican majority in the House will be feckless, that they will think that it is their job to do something and to show the public that it can govern. And so they might start doing some squishy, stupid energy policy stuff that seeds some things to the Biden administration and to the leftist nut jobs that are in the House. So best case scenario, Republicans have the House and they just basically pass budget bills and don't have anything else on the Biden agenda getting through their chamber for the next 2 years.
So, Justin, you weren't on last week, but I am curious of what your answer would have been if asked that same question of what your predictions for the midterms were going to be. Now, be honest. You know the outcomes here, so don't pretend like you would have predicted exactly what was going to happen. But what would have your predictions been last week?
I think like any reasonable-minded person, I would have predicted exactly what ended up happening. And unfortunately, there are no reasonable-minded people on the podcast here, so you all got it wrong. I used the term red wave in a media interview that I was in with a radio station in Florida. which was the only state where there was a red wave. So,
Partial
but
credit.
I also, on social media, I think I made comments to that effect as well. I mean, I believe that there would be, and the reason was really simple. If you just go back and you look at polling of the past several elections and you compare that to the actual results, very rare. I mean, in every case, there actually is not an example where this didn't hold true. The Republicans outperform what the pollsters predict. Always. I mean, not necessarily in every single race, but if you just look at it at a macro level, Republicans do better than what the pollsters predict. In this election, the Republicans did worse than the pollsters predicted in a lot of ways. So that's kind of hard to understand. I mean, it's strange. It just doesn't really fit. The Republicans were essentially in a lot of polls, they were essentially tied in states that Republicans never win or even do well in. Like there were places in the Northeast, congressional races in places like Rhode Island and in New Hampshire and in parts of Washington State and Oregon and California where they never do well. And they were doing well in the polls. I mean, they were basically tied or even leading. And so how could anyone look at that and say, oh, Republicans are going to underperform? I mean, this doesn't make any sense. So I don't know why the polls were so off. That is really strange to me because they don't typically favor Republicans. And they did this time around, apparently. So I think that's how I would have predicted. I think I would have said a really strong red wave. I would have guessed that there would have been probably around 240 or so Republicans in the House, and that they would have taken the Senate at least by a seat or two. That may end up happening, but that's probably where I would have been. I did not think that this sort of underwhelming response was what we were going to end up with. And there's just no enthusiasm on the left. There's no enthusiasm at all. And yet they still managed to win, to outperform Republicans. It's amazing.
So I'll admit I didn't look at any of the polls. I have in past elections. I remember we did like one of those like pick the poll type of games, and when Trump was running in 2016, I got in second place coming behind Justin. But I didn't look at the polls anytime this time around. And when I originally posed my question to Cameron in last week's episode, I framed it in a way that kind of reveals my thoughts on the then upcoming election. So, I honestly thought that it would be more or less how it ended up being. So I know the economy's on the rocks. I know gas prices are double what they were a year ago. I know inflation is crazy high. I know the party in power usually suffers in the midterm. I understand all of these things were pointing towards like a big night for Republicans. However, there was a huge factor that I think was hanging over the heads of Team Red, and that was abortion and the demise of Roe versus Wade. And this is a singular talking point for the left. Like, and most, if not all, of the campaign commercials that I saw featured something in regards to Roe versus Wade and abortion, them trying to take away your rights. And, it's like one step away from Handmaid's Tale or something like that. And I'm no political scientist, but I suspect that perceived human rights issues will trump economic concerns for the general voting public. And before I get a rash of messages hating on me for what I'm saying here, let me just quickly add that this isn't a criticism of the demise of Roe versus Wade at all. I don't mean to come across that way. I understand that this is the most important issue for many voters, and I'd wager that offered the deal, Roe versus Wade gets overturned, but you'll have to sacrifice some of the return in the midterms. I suspect a large percentage of conservatives voters would take that deal all day, and I'm not blaming them for that. So, Jim, I know that we don't really cover this abortion topic or anything like that, but what do you think about my theory here?
I think that theory is right. In fact, what's weird is that in the pre-election polls, when they asked voters what was most important to them and what was going to most affect their vote, abortion was on the list, but it was like number 4 and number 5 behind crime and the economy and inflation and things like that. Climate change, of course, was not even registering. It was so low. But I saw something the other day in Pennsylvania, for instance. Exit polling showed that abortion, especially for women, in the state of Pennsylvania, abortion was actually ranked higher in the exit polls as to what they voted on than it did in the pre-election polls. So I think there's certainly some validity to your analysis there, Donnie. And yeah, I think most conservatives, this is actually very much like Obamacare, right? So the Democrats crammed Obamacare down our throats by hook and by crook, during Christmas week in 2009, knowing that they would be, as President Obama called it, get a shellacking in the midterms. And they thought, totally worth it. We're going to absolutely redefine the relationship between the citizenry and its government by instituting Obamacare. No matter what happens in the midterms, that'll be worth it because that will last. And an election is always temporary. We get another one in another 2 years. And I think most conservatives would definitely trade what happened on Tuesday night. And again, it wasn't a shellacking. It just wasn't as big of a red wave as a lot of people had anticipated. Justin, you had mentioned I think you had mentioned the congressional preference polls, where the Republicans usually are like 2 or 3. If they're only 2 or 3 points down versus Democrats, then they have a really big midterm, or they have a really big congressional victory. And so a lot of these polls showed Republicans up 3 or 4, sometimes 5 points in the congressional preference polls. That's one of the reasons why I predicted a red tsunami, because, if you use just that measure, and there are lots of measures, it sure looked that way. I saw something today where the congressional preference poll the returns nationwide, and that's what that poll measures, nationwide congressional preference. The nationwide congressional preference in that same measure is still plus Republican. It's just that they didn't win some of these races in some of these key states. They did flip, as I mentioned, Democrat seats in the state of Florida, and they did flip several congressional districts, I should say, in the state of New York. And the Republicans had a good night. They just didn't have the night everybody anticipated. I am done getting my hopes up for any elections now because it just ruins my mood for at least a day. But, Democrats, another reason why you would predict a red tsunami is because of all of the headwinds that were going up against this president and his party. I mean, as you mentioned, Donnie, the highest inflation in 40 years. Half the people alive today have never experienced inflation 6%, 7%, 8% every month. They just haven't. They've never experienced an economy this bad in their entire lives. But Biden was actually less popular coming into this midterm election than Trump was when he got his first midterm election. So, that was a factor that you would think would lead to a red wave. You put in stuff like the baby formula shortage that this administration, failed to solve and partially created. Kids permanently set back in their education because of the COVID lockdowns, almost all done and continued and extended for a long time by Democrats. Looming energy crisis. They're having rolling blackouts in Southern California right now. And we're not even really at the crisis point in energy right now. And then Biden actually said before the election, no more, I'm going to kill coal, and there's going to be no more drilling anymore either. You put all these things together, and you would think that, not just the usual political headwinds, but they kept stepping on rakes everywhere they went. And it still turned out that Republicans won, but they didn't pick up, 30, 40, 50 seats. They're probably going to end up picking up about, 20, which is still pretty good.
Well, Justin, so I'm not sure I still fully understand the extent of kind of the dour mood of conservatives. And I made this very clear last week that I am not the most, when it comes to all this stuff, I'm not politically minded. I rather talk about policy. So maybe this is par for the course when it comes to politics. But like I mentioned earlier, the Republicans won. It wasn't a huge win, but it was a win. The divided Congress is going to prevent Biden's most radical legislation from getting passed. And even if Republicans took both chambers of Congress, it's not like they'd be able to do much considering Biden is still the president. So why the long faces, Justin?
Well, I think because generally speaking, the party that is out of power in a president's, after a president has been elected, the first midterm after that election, the party that is not in power always wins, or almost always wins. I mean, that's what that happens in almost every single election. So the Republicans won this time around. Democrats won the first midterm that Donald Trump was president. In Obama's first midterm, Republicans won, and on it goes. Republicans all the way back to Bill Clinton and Republicans. Okay, so this has been going on for a long time. There are very few exceptions to this rule historically, okay, in the last, say, 40 or 50 years. So Republicans were supposed to win. The issue was things were so bad that Republicans should do better than just what normally happens. And they didn't. See, this is like ideal conditions for Republicans winning. They usually outperform Democrats in midterms. Usually they do better. They usually do really well when they are not the party in power and they are going up against the first-term president. This first-term president is doing a terrible job. And most Americans think he's not doing a very good job. The guy can't even remember which country his son died in. Okay. He's delusional and he's decrepit and he's falling apart. The man literally could drop dead tomorrow and it would shock absolutely no one if that happened. How many presidents can you say that for in the past 100 years where you're like, yeah, he died yesterday? Not a shock. That makes sense. I mean, that's the kind of person that we have. Like, it doesn't make any sense. So for Republicans to just do average for a midterm and a first year of a first midterm after a new president's been elected and they're the party for them to just do average is a huge letdown. I mean, you have to, if we can't win under these conditions overwhelmingly, then how can we ever overwhelmingly win? I mean, that's and by we, I mean conservatives, Republican conservative ideas, not necessarily Republicans and Democrats, but conservatives didn't win overwhelmingly despite all the conditions being perfect for them to win overwhelmingly. And I guess that's the issue here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think one of the factors, especially as like the election night kind of started, was that we saw these results coming in from Florida. And everyone was like, oh, man, like if this is a sign of things to come, it's going to be a red tsunami. And it seems like that red tsunami was basically just contained to Florida. DeSantis cleaned the clock of his opponent, winning by like 20 points. Marco Rubio, or Little Marco, depending on who you ask, won his race by 16.5 points. So, I mean, Florida is like solidly red, very, very solidly red. And it was like, oh, that didn't happen the rest of the states. Like, I think so. I think it's like starting off with this like really good appetizer, and then like the main course was just like satisfactory.
Well, I mean, I think that's partially true, but doesn't that kind of disprove the theory that you had before, which was the theory that you advanced before was that it was about abortion. And that was really one of the main reasons why that this didn't materialize the way a lot of people thought. Everything else is terrible, but there's that abortion issue, and but that didn't seem to matter in Florida. And last I checked, maybe it would have won by 30 points. A lot of women.
I don't know. Maybe it would have won by 30 points.
Well, but that's the thing. That's a state that normally you don't win by 20 or 20 points. So
that's fair.
So something happened there that didn't happen elsewhere. And abortion is not that, because that issue is the same everywhere. So what I believe is, and I don't think Republicans really want to admit this, but I think that this is probably the most logical explanation for what happened. Republicans nationally really didn't have a plan. Didn't have a big grand vision for how to fix the country. Did not run on here's how we're going to solve your problems, or here's our big sweeping change for America, or whatever.
Contract with America 4.0.
There was nothing. Yeah. There was nothing. Their campaign slogan was, "We're not the Democrats.
Biden stinks."
And that's it. Biden's a joke, and everyone's like, "Yeah," but I think in a lot of parts of the country, and I think this explains perfectly what happened in Pennsylvania. In a lot of parts of the country, Jim's from Pennsylvania, so he knows this. There is they want deep in their souls, they want to vote for Democrats. They actually do, because that's in the bloodstream. Like, I'm from New England, Jim's from Pennsylvania. In those places, there's this old school establishment, like affinity for the Democratic Party that goes back a long ways because of unions and all this stuff that happened 50 years ago. That Democrat Party is dead. I know that. You know that. People who pay attention know that. And in their hearts, they know that too. But they want to vote Democrat. But if a Republican comes along that gives them a good reason not to vote Democrat, they absolutely will, because the Democrats have lost their minds in a lot of these places, including in Pennsylvania. I mean, literally, Fetterman can barely function. So, but they would rather vote for that than vote for just your run-of-the-mill Republican that has no big grand vision for any. You have to give them a reason. So in Florida, there was a reason. The reason was Ron DeSantis had a vision. He was very clear about that vision. And for 4 years of being governor, everybody understood what that vision was. He put Florida first. He took on the establishment. He did the unpopular thing that he thought was right. And he was wildly successful. And people from all across the country flocked to Florida to be basically free. I mean, that's why they went there, to be free and to have lower taxes, better economy, better weather, etc. Right? But that's why they went to Florida. And so there was a clear vision that people were able to buy into and say, yeah, I'm for that. But in all these other races, it's like, it just comes down to, well, are you against the Democrats? Because the Republicans they're not really offering me anything. Mm-hmm. And I think that was that, coupled with the Democrats were successful in those places because they control the media, in convincing a lot of regular suburban, especially women, that the Republicans' mission in life all over the country is to take away your right to an abortion, which a lot of women do care about. That's true. And the other thing was that any Republican that's ever said something nice about Donald Trump is a treasonous, election-denying January 6th rioter. Whether they were there or not, whether they said anything about elections or not, doesn't matter. That's who they are. And so they turned Republicans, the standard just Republican Party, generic ballot, those people are radicals, okay? And unless you gave them a reason to buy into some vision, they, all things being equal, in a place like Pennsylvania, will go for the Democrat. And that's the problem. All things were equal in too many of these states where they have a tendency to lean Democrat, but not in Florida. And that's why in Florida they won overwhelmingly.
So I want to talk about this kind of this narrative that's been going around, and this doesn't seem to be an artificially created narrative by the corporate media. It seems pretty organic. This discussion that's been sprouting up in nearly every corner of the conservative sphere, and that is Trump versus DeSantis. So this is popping up because while DeSantis cleaned up in Florida, many of the Trump endorsed candidates didn't fare so well. The most obvious being the candidate, Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, lost to Fetterman, who's, and unlike Justin, I'm not trying to be mean here, has literal brain damage. In an Axios article I have linked in the show notes, it shows the win-loss rate of the Trump-endorsed candidates, and it looks like Trump's picks will end up being mostly split for the governor spots, pretty much split when it comes to the House spots, and a little bit better than that when it comes to the Senate seats. But altogether, it was a less than stellar record when it comes to Trump's endorsements. In fact, there's a lot of commentary out there that's saying that Trump, while not on the ballot, was the biggest loser of the night. And again, before I get a bunch of angry comments, let me just quickly say that I am and have been a big Trump fan. And I know much of the media hates him, and that makes me tend to like him even more. So none of this should be taken as some type of attack on the man. So let me just put that out there. Jim, with everybody's eyes already on the general election, 2 years from now, what do you think Trump should do? Not will do, should do.
He's supposed to announce what he's going to do, I believe on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday. I think the mood of that is going to be a lot different than it would have been had this Tuesday turned out a little bit differently. Mm-hmm. It's there's a lot of Trump fans who are disappointed disappointed in Trump. I mean, he said yesterday, he tweeted yesterday? Or I'm sorry, he's not on Twitter, on Truth Social, but I saw it screen capped and shared on Twitter. He was ribbing DeSantis for not getting as many million votes as he did for president in 20, I guess maybe either in 2016 or 2020.
Right.
So then he was saying, so like, I'm more popular than you, even in your own state, which is an absurd thing to say, because this was a midterm election, not a presidential election. And it accomplishes nothing when people's to put that out there, when conservatives and your own supporters and Republicans are pretty upset about what happened on Tuesday, to kind of basically be trying to throw cold water on the only really super fantastic good news of the night, that the Democrats were absolutely routed in the state of Florida, and you as Trump come in and just kind of make fun of them for it. I mean, that's indicative of the worst of Trump. I mean, even Trump's fans, and what I liked about Trump was basically two things, and still like about Trump. He drives the media crazy. Or maybe I'm going to have more fingers here. He drives the media crazy. He doesn't put up with any BS from them. He calls them fake news. Those are huge for me as a former member of the media. And two, most of his policy decisions as president were extremely beneficial to this country. We had a roaring economy. We had our allies, supposed allies in NATO, starting to pay their fair share for their own continent's defense. We had expansion of energy production in this country, to which it made us energy independent for the first time in almost anyone's lifetime in this country. Those are enormously positive accomplishments. And for that, he should be admired. But it's really hard to again, admire that kind of pettiness that he tends to just not be able to resist. It's easy to let that go while he's president and implementing all these wonderful policies and pissing off the media. It's a little harder to do when your emotions are still a little bit too raw from what was kind of a disappointing night. And I just wanted to add one more thing, just going back to what Justin had said about Pennsylvania. Yeah, I'm from Pittsburgh. John Fetterman, who is what you get if Lurch and Uncle Fester had a baby, you end up with John Fetterman. He won 63% of the vote in my beloved Pittsburgh, and he won 81% of the vote, or 82% of the vote, in the city of Philadelphia. Over the rest of the country, or over the rest of the counties in Pennsylvania, Dr. Oz won. Again, Dr. Oz was the handpicked candidate of Donald Trump. There was actually really no reason for him to get involved in the primary at all. He could have actually poured his support both physically and financially, which he did almost none of in the cycle, by the way. He didn't pay for any ads. There was no, Make America Great Again PAC, for instance, that he could have poured money into to run ads in some of these places, trying to get some kind of cohesive message. And he didn't do that. And so, he may have a mixed record on the people he supported, but it was a pretty half-hearted support up and down the tickets, if you ask me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say that Donald Trump at least was planning on announcing his run. I'm sure it's still the case. He was interviewed by Glenn Beck a few days ago, like right before the election. And Beck asked him, he's like, I'm going to ask you one more time. Are you going to run, Trump? And he says, I'm going to make a major announcement next week. And, I think you're going to be very happy about the announcement. So he's basically saying, like, yes, I'm going to run. So recently, obviously looking towards a potential matchup against DeSantis, Trump has taken a few shots at the Florida governor, referring to him as Ron DeSanctimonious at one point. He mentioned how he's got like dirt on DeSantis, and he says that like nobody knows DeSantis more than me, like maybe even more than his own wife or something like that. So Justin, to me, this is like the worst case scenario. I like Trump, like I said, but I also like DeSantis. And I think that DeSantis would be a stronger candidate, all things considered. And to have them potentially beating each other up for months in a primary sounds horrible. What do you think about all this?
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds awful. I mean, how does this help? See, like this is the issue. The issue that we have right now on the right is that there is no clear message. There is no clear sweeping idea. There is no conservative version of single payer healthcare, which was a big thing a few years back. Green New Deal, which was a big thing a couple years after that. There's no student debt forgiveness type thing. I'm not saying these policies are good. These policies are all bad, but I'm saying, where's the conservative version of that, where they come out and say, well, this is what we're going to do. This is how it's going to fix America. This is how your life's going to be much better. If you vote for us, this thing is going to happen. They don't do that. They have given up entirely. The whole conservative movement right now from a political standpoint. I'm not saying at the think tank level. We talk about policy all the time, but they're not. It's all about politics now for Republicans. And that's the issue. So the reason I bring that up is not that Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump don't have policy ideas. It's that will not be the focus if those two are fighting each other. The focus is going to be taking cheap shots. It's going to be political posturing. It's going to be about political strategy. That's what's going to be on TV every single night. That's what people are going to be talking about. The policy proposals that are there are going to be swept under the rug, and all anyone's going to talk about is the politics. And the crazy thing that Trump said the other day on social media and how Ron DeSantis responds or doesn't respond to it, does that mean that he believes it or agrees with Trump or maybe he doesn't agree with it, or maybe his reaction wasn't strong enough? That's what's going to be it's going to be like that all the time for years. That's what's going to happen.
Well, wait. Let's respond to this question right here. Would Trump DeSantis be a dream ticket? A, and I think part B, would that even be like remotely possible?
So I would, yeah. I mean, Jim's holding up a 0. I would say that if Ron DeSantis is stupid enough to run on a ticket with Donald Trump, he does not deserve to be president of the United States. And I would say he's not stupid, and he's not going to do that.
Sure.
But if he is, then he does not deserve to be president, because that would be absolutely insane. There's no reason to do that at all for him.
Yeah, Justin, let me talk a little bit about this vision thing you're talking about. And I think you're right. I mean, we don't live in Florida, but I with one eye looked a little bit at what DeSantis was doing down there, but he did have a message. And his message was, I'm going to get your life back to normal. We're going to get the kids back in school. You're not going to mask them anymore. If you're a parent, you're going to be able to live a normal life with your children and your family again. And I'm going to stop all this woke crap and get the radical leftist agenda out of our public schools. I don't live there, and I know that that's what his message was. And it was obviously an overwhelmingly successful message, because that's what people actually want. Now, is it harder for a member of Congress to say that he's going to be able to do that for you, considering that Congress doesn't have really a lot of control over that? Yeah. And, but it worked in Florida. I mean, heck, it was just a year ago where the media was pounding Ron DeSantis for threatening Disney with its special tax breaks to remove those if they didn't stop all this woke BS. He got hammered in the press for that. Even people on the right said, that's a bad idea, man. Don't do that. It worked. It worked so well because it actually expresses a vision of the country. And I think, if that's why I think a lot of people are excited about the idea of Ron DeSantis running for president, because he is a person who would be able to bring forward a conservative vision that actually has an impact on people's lives and resonates with voters.
Yeah, I would be perfectly okay like trading out Trump for DeSantis. I think DeSantis brings a lot to the table that used to be unique to Trump. And that's why I like Trump so much, was because he was like the only person that was espousing some of these America first, energy independence, like some of that stuff, like with real enthusiasm behind it. At least DeSantis doesn't pull any punches when it comes to the media, stuff like that. So if I had to trade out Trump for DeSantis, I would be pretty easy to do that. But if it were if I had to trade out Trump for some establishment Republican like Mitt Romney or something like that, it would be a lot harder for me to buy in that. Probably impossible, actually. Thankfully, Ron DeSantis does bring to the table some of the things that made me like Trump in the first place. So, there's a couple more topics that I want to get to. We were already talking about this Dr. Oz and this Fetterman thing, which is just absurd. I thought, I know the poll showed whatever they were showing when it comes to this race, but I thought there was no chance that this Fetterman guy was going to win. Again, not trying to be mean, literal brain damage, right? And are politics so partisan that you would vote for someone who can't communicate coherently just because they have the right letter in front of their name? Yes. That's insane to me. And Justin, I showed this next clip to Jim earlier, and I hope you haven't seen it yet, because I want to see your initial reaction to it. But this is a panel on MSNBC that's not only congratulating Fetterman on his election to the Senate, but speculating on his chances if he were to run for president. So go ahead and play. Go ahead and play this.
I have
clip,
not
Andy.
seen this.
As a nominee at some point for president, I know there's some variables, obviously, but just a few. But I just, what he did in the super red, deep red parts of Pennsylvania, and the way that he ran ahead of Biden, as you were saying, ran ahead of Trump. I mean, it just makes you wonder about his future.
So what do you think, Justin? What do we think? Should we start clocking him in for the 2024 primary now, or what?
The thing that I actually love about this, that's obviously these people are mentally insane, but the thing that I love about this is, you know what this is doing in effect. Like, they didn't think this when they said this, but this is a panel full of, I think they were all women, right?
No, Michael Steele was in there.
All women. Oh, okay. So they're all women. So they're all women. They're on the panel, and they're talking about future presidents, and who they in their minds, they're thinking, this John Fetterman guy, yeah, he can barely speak, but you know what? He's kind of brain dead. For me. But no, even better, he's probably a better choice than our sitting vice president.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting how can you imagine if anybody thought for even a second that she was a reasonable option, even a little bit? There is no freaking way anybody on these networks would say anything other than she's the one. She's the one. She's the one. She's the one. And yet now we literally have people who have severe mental ailments are now moving up the list above the sitting vice president of the United States, a woman who would be the first female president in American history, a panel full of women saying on left-wing MSNBC, saying, you know what, this guy with all the mental problems, him, he could win. Maybe he could probably win. That
how good he didn't
tells you everything you need to know about Kamala Harris. I mean, that is seriously as big of a slap in the face as you could possibly imagine. And Kamala Harris is she's living out the plot of Veep. She just is of HBO's Veep. She's living that plot out. Just nobody wants her. Nobody likes her. She's completely useless in every way. And it's truly astounding how unpopular she is. It really, and this is just perfect example of it. But the thing that beyond, in addition to that, I mean, listening to that is it is nauseating. I mean, the only reason they're saying this is because they're just so excited that they didn't get completely blown out, that they are uncontrollably happy here, and to the point where they're in a euphoric state, saying insane things, and that just eats away at my soul. I mean, God, I hate that.
Jim, there's a joke. I'm pretty sure you're aware of it. It's based off that really good Mike Judge movie, Idiocracy, where people say that we're getting close to electing President Camacho as president. I think we might have blown past that already at this level of insanity with this panel considering John Fetterman as a realistic candidate. It's we're going to long for the days of President Camacho if they're any part serious about this. What were your thoughts when you saw? Did you think that was real when I sent it, or was that a deep fake, or what was your initial?
I thought, when you said that to her, come on, they're not. All I saw was the link and it said, Fetterman run for president. I said, this is a joke. Nobody would actually say this on television. Nobody would say this on television. And yet there it was. I had to watch the clip and it was real. A Biden Fetterman ticket, move Kamala out of the way and make it Biden Fetterman 2024.
That's a winning ticket.
That's a winning ticket because, Katie Tur was the MSNBC person there. And she was touting how well Fetterman did in red districts in Pennsylvania. As I just mentioned before, that's not how or why he won. He did not do great in red districts. He did great. He won for two reasons. One, because of Pittsburgh, where I said, or again, he got 63, 65% of the vote. And Philadelphia, amazingly, 81% of the vote. And two, and one of our commenters here on YouTube had mentioned it. I was going to mention it anyway. That Tucker Carlson in his monologue last night said that in Pennsylvania, 70% of Democrats did mail-in balloting and voted early. And so there was a reason why. I mean, there's a reason why they moved that debate between Dr. Oz and John Fetterman to, what was it? It was like a week before the election, maybe 10 days before the election. They were supposed to have a debate in September. They didn't have it because Uncle Fester was recovering from a stroke. That's why it was absolutely impossible for him to do a debate. It was already pretty bad. And so, when most of the Democrats, they would have voted for him anyway. But, I think one of the things about this election cycle, actually, that I hope we can get some consensus on from both liberals, conservatives, Democrats, and Republicans, is that we need to fix the way we vote, have elections run in this country. We're still waiting. I think this morning it was still only 67% of the vote was counted in the state of Arizona. Florida is 2 or 3 times larger than Arizona, and they had all their votes counted by 10 p.m. Eastern time, and we were able to announce the results. We're going to be waiting until like past the weekend, maybe next week, to see who's going to be the new senator from the state of Arizona when the entire federal government can hang in the balance. That's insane. Now, of course, Florida in the year 2000 had a real big problem with their election. The butterfly ballot, the hanging chads, and all that nonsense. And they actually figured out a way to fix it. If every governor should be calling up Florida and say, how do you do that? Why don't you do a seminar? How about a big Zoom call? Let's all do it like Florida, so that we actually know what's going on in this country on election night or the morning after, and not weeks after the election is over.
Yep, no doubt about that. Yeah, Fetterman. That's a career that we're going to keep a close eye on. He's got room to grow. The ceiling, I don't know where the ceiling is. He doesn't know where the ceiling is.
Is he going to wear his hoodie and skateboard shorts on the floor of the Senate? Is what I'm actually curious about.
All I know is that he supports fracking, he stands, and he supports fracking, and he stands. So that's all I need to know about him, to know that he's got presidential material written all over him. So let's talk about what happens next. So I want to start off this segment by playing a clip. Now, this one's going to be maybe even rougher to stomach than that Fetterman one. So this is former Press Secretary Jen Psaki reporting on the mood of the White House during election night. Go ahead and play this video.
Touch with the White House. They are giddy and gleeful, as they should be, about where things are sitting right now, Rachel. But also, candidates, regardless of what the outcome was, candidates were not running against the Biden agenda. If the Republicans had won back a bunch of seats, it wasn't because Democrats were running away from the Inflation Reduction Act, right, and doing something about climate change or building bridges and fixing roads, or running away from Biden saying, I want you to codify Roe and protect a woman's right to choose. The takeaway to me is this is the right agenda.
So this is a professional spin artist that's putting a spin on everything that's going on and concocting a narrative that's going to be doled out to the public for the next several weeks in the wake of this election. So, Justin, I'm going to go to you first. Do you think the White House is, now granted this is earlier on the night, so they don't know exactly how the results kind of we still don't know how the results are going to pan out, but do you think the White House is right to be gleeful and giddy over these results? What do you think, Justin?
I guess it's sort of like if you commit a crime and instead of getting life in prison, you get 40 years in prison. It's like, I guess, would you be gleeful and giddy? I don't know. I mean, it seems kind of bizarre, but it just goes to show you how bad even they thought things were going to go. I mean, when they could still lose the House and the Senate and yet be gleeful and giddy about it, because at least it wasn't by, 50 seats. Instead it was only, by 15. Like that's great. It's like, that's really not, but it kind of fits, right? I mean, this is a loser administration, so losing fits right in with everything else they do. So I guess it makes sense. But I think that the Biden administration's agenda is effectively dead, regardless of what happens, because Republicans are almost certainly going to win the House. If they don't, by some tragedy, it will be only by a few seats. Like it'll be 1 seat or 2 seats, so they're not going to be able to push this crazy far left wing agenda that they've been pushing so far. You're not going to get another Inflation Reduction Act or anything like that. Like that isn't going to happen. The Biden administration's agenda is dead. The only things they can do now are through the executive branch. They're going to try to do a ton of that, regardless of how this election turns out. The Senate still matters because if Republicans can get 51 votes, then that means that Biden isn't going to get any more Supreme Court justices on the bench. So that is really, really important. And federal justices as well. So that still matters. These things matter. There's really no reason for them to be happy or celebrating, though, because their agenda is dead. And Biden is not going to be president for a second term. I don't think that's even possible because I think he's probably not going to run again. Even if Democrats win, I don't think Biden will win. So really, I don't know why they would be celebrating. Other than, I guess they just thought that it was going to be a bloodbath. I thought it was. Most Americans thought it was, and it didn't turn out that way. So I guess that's better than nothing. But still, I mean, I don't know why you would be celebrating. If you lose by 3 points versus losing by 33 points, you're still losing. And that's
right.
Well, you know what? The Chicago Bears just lost by just a couple of points. And we were out there celebrating too, because Justin Fields looked pretty good in that thing. So I don't know, a little bit of an analogy there, but Jim,
go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, I'm just the narrative being spun by the White House was that this is like they should almost feel vindicated. In recent statements, the Biden and administration officials have signaled that they're more or less going to stay the course when it comes to their policy, because clearly American public likes the direction that they're trying to take the country in and all of this stuff. And that goes for them, with energy policy, fighting back climate change. This includes increased spending. This includes, pursuing election integrity laws and all of that stuff. But again, like, does that even really matter, considering that Congress will either be divided or completely controlled by Republicans by when this is all said and done? What do you think?
Well, first of all, to just kind of loop it all the way back to the beginning of this podcast, and why, conservatives and people on the right were disappointed with the results is because with all the factors that were factored in, it should have been a complete red tsunami. Let's see here. In Trump's midterm, 43% of voters said the country was headed in the right direction. It was just 26 for Biden's for Biden in his midterm election. And just a few weeks ago, that we're heading in the right direction was in the teens. And an exit poll by CNN showed that 73% of voters were either angry or dissatisfied with the way things were going in America. So this giddy idea that our agenda was not rejected is not borne out by the facts. Why it wasn't a bigger Republican victory. I think it will take a little bit more time maybe to figure that out. But the fact is, it doesn't matter if you win by 50 or you win by 1. A win is a win. And the Democrats in the House don't get to run. They don't get to chair any of the committees. They don't get to set the agenda. They don't get to write the budget. They don't get to write tax law. That's all going to go to the Republicans. And again, as I said earlier, my big concern is that Republicans in Congress tend to be pretty feckless. And again, I don't want them to be able to try to prove to the American people that we're worthy of governing. Your job is to stop all of this leftist nonsense that's coming out of the administration and perhaps even out of the Senate. You have to stop this agenda. And I think Justin is right. For the most part, at least when it comes to legislation, the agenda is dead. I mean, he is a lame duck president right now. Yeah. But if you think Joe Biden is not going to run for president, let's just put it this way. If it was a 50 seat pickup in the House for Republicans, Joe Biden is dead. He's a dead man walking politically because of, look at the euphoria from these people. I mean, the Democrats, it's like surviving. It's the euphoria of surviving an auto accident. You started to enter the intersection and a huge semi truck comes along and shears off the very front of your car, leaving you sitting there exposed to the world with your feet hanging out, but you're alive. And that's exhilarating. Oh my God, I can't believe I survived. I'm not dead. I should have been dead. That's the euphoria that is being felt on MSNBC. And that is going to translate to Joe Biden. I mean, I watched about 60 seconds.
So in 2024, they're like, go full speed in that same intersection, bro.
That's right. I guess so. But look, I watched about 90 seconds of Joe Biden's press conference yesterday about the midterms, that was actually the best I'd ever seen him. He was actually energetic. He was excited. He was happy. So the giddiness in the White House is real. And if you think Joe Biden is now going to step aside and say, I've done my job for this country and for history, and leave the stage, they're going to have to drag him away. He's running again.
On a high note.
And that's good news.
And on a high note, Biden. Yeah, come on, you could do that. He could do that.
I mean, I just don't think there was ever a plan, regardless of what happened, for him to run again. I think the plan is for him not to run again. He can't say that because then he has no political clout at all. But I don't see anybody thinking that he's going to make it through another. Can you imagine this guy being president for 6 more years? I mean, come on, there's no way. But beside putting all that aside, I mean, at the end of the day, if you're going to take a positive away from this, other than, Republicans probably will almost certainly will win the House, and they probably will. They have a good shot, or a decent shot of actually taking control of the Senate. But even beyond that, in a way, you could make the case that given how fundamentally flawed the Republican strategy has been, the messaging has been, the lack of focus on policy has been, this is sort of the best outcome in a way. Because if they had won in a blowout, I'm not sure that anyone would have noticed that there was a problem. I don't know that anybody would have stopped and said, hey, something isn't resonating with people. They would have thought, no, they blew them out. Now we have the benefit of being able to look at the situation with open eyes, say, you know what, there clearly is a problem here, and we need to change something here. Yeah, without having totally lost, right? So we did win. So Republicans did win. Conservatives did win. The conservative movement did win, not by as much as we wanted, not in a way that is convincing, not in a way that will allow us to really make big sweeping changes, which is what we need to do. But they didn't lose completely, and they still get to see that, you know what, we do have to make some changes. And in addition to that, there was a clear illustration of someone who did overwhelmingly win, and not just Ron DeSantis, but all Republicans in Florida did really, really well. Marco Rubio won by like 10 plus points. That was 16. A guy who also, that was a guy who also originally barely won. So the Republican branding, because I think largely of Ron DeSantis, was very, very effective in Florida and not in much of the rest of the country in these swing states.
What about Ohio?
Have a clear lesson.
What about Ohio? J.D. Vance, an author of Hillbilly Elegy, who is a complete political neophyte, wins handily and easily in the state of Ohio. So he's going to be senator for the next 6 years. So there are places where conservatism actually did win in a lot of places. People are kind of losing sight of that. A lot of people got elected on Tuesday who expressed a clear conservative vision and won pretty comfortably with it.
Oh, I've got a better win than what you proposed there, Justin. This is the best thing of the night. And that was the fact that Beto O'Rourke's career is over. Please, crossing my fingers. Please tell me that that's the case. He's done, right? I mean, come on. He's lost on every level now. He's got to be done. It's pretty incredible. There were a couple of open up a bike shop or something like that and sell scooters to kids.
There were a couple of pluses. Beto O'Rourke's career probably is over. Another dancing fanatic, Stacey Abrams' career is hopefully over because she got beat very badly in Georgia. And Charlie Crist in Florida became one of the very first politicians ever to lose a federal race, both as a Republican, an independent, and a Democrat. He's lost all three. The trifecta. I mean, very rare for that to happen.
That's hard to do, man. That's hard to do.
Extremely hard to do. In fairness, it's extremely hard to get a nomination in both the Republican and Democratic parties in one career. That's tough. And as independent to even be on the ballot as a serious candidate. So for him to lose in all three. So we may see the demise of both all three of those, Abrams, O'Rourke, and Charlie Crist, all of them losers. And I'm glad that they're gone. So that's great. I mean, that is a plus. There's no doubt about that. Yep. And there's a picture of Beto. Where's the video of him dancing? That's what we should have.
We don't need to
have the video of him dancing, please.
But yeah,
Jim,
Beto has spent $164 million in both his doomed presidential attempt and in this attempt to be governor of Texas. So yeah, I mean, is it good that $164 million would just set on fire in completely unwinnable races? Yeah.
The other thing that it illustrates very clearly is the fact that Democrats thought that Beto O'Rourke, Stacey Abrams, Charlie Crist, and Fetterman, that these people are good candidates, viable candidates, regardless of what happened on election. It shows how completely and utterly out of touch they are as well. It's just the people who won, like Fetterman, won because he was a Democrat and Republicans didn't have a good vision on the other side, but not because of anything having to do with him. So Democrats, I don't think, have learned their lesson from this at all. Not at all, which is probably a good thing for our side as well.
Yeah, and the criticism, the criticism of Republicans, and one of the instant takes on Twitter on election night was like, candidate quality matters. Well, it's like, it's not just on the Republican side. It happens on the, they would actually point to Dr. Oz, like, this guy shouldn't have been running for Senate. That's ridiculous. But yeah, you got Beto, you got Fetterman, you have Crist, you have Stacey Abrams. So candidate quality actually goes both ways. And they lost those races because they had horrible candidates.
Yep. Well, we're going to be turning back to policy. This was an unusual venture into politics for this podcast. But we're going to be turning back to policy in the future here, the future episodes. But I just do want to thank you for tuning into this episode of the In the Tank podcast. If you would like, you could hit that subscribe button. That'd be greatly appreciated. Hit that share button. Hit the like button, leave a comment under this video, all things that you could do to help break through those big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. If you would like, you can follow us on Twitter at InTheTankPod. If you have any questions, suggestions, or anything for the show, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
At Jay Lakely on Twitter, where I have a big, beautiful new blue checkmark.
That he paid for.
Quiet. Also, Heartland is on Twitter, and always visit heartland.org.
Justin Haskins, where can the fine people find you?
At Justin T. Haskins on Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Getter, Facebook, and at stoppingsocialism.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for tuning into this episode of In the Tank. Talk to you next week. Finger guns. Oh, God.
And the hips come get in my car for a yellow bone.